Okay, today we are going to talk about leaky brain syndrome, or as Dr. Gates puts it, where the rubber meets the road, I would assume in chronic pain. And I won't tell them where you got that from.
Okay.
So I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford, and I am a certified functional medicine practitioner. I have also been a chiropractor since 1979. I got a number of other certifications and all that type of stuff, but those are the two that really matter. And this is
Dr. Randall Gates. I am a board certified chiropractic neurologist as well as being a chiropractor.
And a lot of you have watched us over a period of time. We just found out that we have been watched over 1 million minutes since we've been on, starting to do this last year. And it seems to be accelerating quite a bit. So that is what keeps us doing this. So this topic really is, and I'm not the functional neurologist, but this is, to me, this is what differentiates what we do from any place else. And this is not a promotion for us. It's a promotion for the most, by far, in my opinion, the most underappreciated aspect of chronic pain and chronic conditions is brain function. And it's now starting to be embraced more and more out there. But as typically occurs, it seems to be getting embraced in a fashion that can be addressed in kind of like no offense to McDonald's, but you guys are the guys, in a McDonald's type of fashion, McDonald's hamburgers type of fashion, as opposed to really getting the attention that it requires for those of you who have chronic pain. Most of you are familiar with stress, and yet affecting chronic pain, but it's interesting, even when I talk to these folks in the consults, they kind of don't get stress as their brain. It's kind of a funny thing. It's kind of a funny thing. They just feel it's like a personality defect. But stress, the type of stress, the kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome that you see in these chronic pain syndromes, a lot of times it's not you. And you can look at one of our videos on that, our video on stress, and we describe that mechanism and so on and so forth. But this is a little bit different animal, and this is really present in a lot of our patients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're finding, and we're actually, yeah.
So again, we've developed a chronic pain and chronic condition practice. We were just sitting here and discussing beforehand how many of the things that we've been getting told that we're crazy about in the last 7 years now are not only being embraced in both the medical and the alternative professions, but that they're actually making courses out there for medical doctors that wouldn't allow Dr. Gates and I in on that. So it's kind of funny.
Or naturopaths.
Or naturopaths, or chiropractors.
Naturopaths really
or acupuncture
paved the way for this, and chiropractors really kind of set the tone after that. Yeah.
So we mushed functional medicine together with functional neurology, and it turns out that it's hard to really successfully and consistently address chronic pain issues unless you are addressing them both. So let's talk about leaky brain syndrome. That's not a term that most people are familiar with.
Yeah,
they're familiar with leaky gut syndrome.
Right. And so you and I have been familiar.
And for those who have not watched this for all those 1 million minutes, I have this too. So go ahead.
So you and I have talked about blood-brain barrier problems for a long period of time.
Right.
And leaky brain syndrome, in essence, is a term that designates when somebody has an abnormal blood-brain barrier issue. We'll kind of go into that. And it's really interesting. I kind of wanted to take a step back because Dr. Rutherford and I have seen these changes over the last 5 to 6 years, and we commonly will say, we're doing all sorts of different protocols. 5 years ago, we were working on blood sugar, we were working on anemia, we were working on the adrenals. And then ultimately Dr. Rutherford asked me, well, when does everybody really seem to have the greatest improvement? And I said, the gut, when we fix the gut. And you'll see today in this brain talk how the gut really ties into this, and more specifically how it really ties into a lot of neurological diseases and how it applies to this field of functional neurology, as we term it. So yeah, so the overview of our practice is that we treat primarily neurological cases here. We treat peripheral neuropathy. That's where people have numbness and tingling and burning in their feet. There is a brain component to peripheral neuropathy. We'll show you the articles. We treat dizziness and vertigo patients, migraine headaches, chronic pain syndromes, including fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. Most of these, in our opinion, have a correlation with the blood-brain barrier. And fortunately, thankfully, to Dr. Arista Vajdani and Cyrex Laboratories, we now have the capacity to test for this.
And a couple of the things that you may not know that have a brain component would be irritable bowel syndrome, leaky gut, thyroid.
Right. Yeah.
So
we're going to talk about thyroid.
Yeah. So when he says that we have a primary neurological practice and somebody comes in here and we're talking about their gut and we start talking about their brain, sometimes it's kind of
right. They don't get that association.
But the brain is where it's at.
For sure, the brain is where it's at. And so we're going to kind of bring all of it together today as how this leaky blood-brain barrier ties in. And Dr. Rutherford and I went to a seminar late September 2013. We had a very good time for about a week. We were in Portland, Oregon. And that kind of was the platform for which we jumped into leaky gut syndrome wholeheartedly. And since then, we have made it our mission where we test every patient for leaky gut syndrome because it's so important to every case. We're now collaborating with Cyrex Laboratories and some of their researchers there on writing papers about the clinical utility of using their tests for every patient with those conditions that we mentioned. And I foresee that over the next year, we're probably going to gain the same amount of data with this blood-brain barrier issue, and that it's really a must.
We being the entire research community.
We being you and me.
Okay. I learn these things sometimes when you learn them.
Which will then dovetail into the alternative community on the necessity of testing for this blood-brain barrier issue, because it is that important. We have all these disorders on the rise, like autism, and things are just so much more common now than they used to be, and nobody knows why. Well, we have to start looking at the neuroimmune implications for these disorders. And it is being looked at, but it needs to be, people need to walk out on the plank and make some efforts to try things. And I only say that because I even referenced some article in one of our broadcasts from the World Journal of Gastroenterology, and they're talking about autism, and they're saying how the American Pediatric Association says, well, there's some information on the tie of leaky gut to autism, but there's not enough information. We need randomized controlled clinical trials, which take 10 years to complete before we can even talk about this. And this gastroenterology journal, a formidable journal, I might add, with a high impact factor, said, no, we need to actually jump onto this and start creating solutions for these kids because we have a growing epidemic and nobody's doing anything about it.
And that's the reason when I got sick and I was searching for this, they had estimated the different estimating agencies estimated, Stanford, Harvard, National Health Institute estimated that there was 50 million chronic pain patients in the United States. And now they estimate there's 118 million and growing. And this is exactly why we're going to wait until 10, 15 years from now when we have enough randomized studies. Leaky gut, we talked about a lot. When we first started talking about it, I don't like the term. I think Dr. Gates doesn't like the term because it's kind of like one of those catchy terms that gets into the lexicon of the public, but it's now being used in research studies, in the literature and everything. So we'll talk about leaky gut. And one of the reasons I didn't like the term was because it gave the medical doctors, and we're not anti-medicine. We'll say this again, we're not anti-medicine. We work with the medical community when it is necessary, which is a small percentage of our patients. We have to work in an integrated fashion, but we do, okay? And it gave the medical community the opportunity to make fun of us. Oh, leaky gut syndrome. Oh, that's so funny.
What is that?
What is
that?
that?
I never heard of that.
Oh, your colonoscopy was perfectly normal and your endoscopy was normal, so these people are crazy. You contend that this new term, leaky brain syndrome, will be as popular as leaky gut syndrome in 2 years. So if we're going to be doing all the research, how's that going to work?
Well, I think that 2 years ago, leaky gut syndrome wasn't, as Dr. Rutherford would say, we would say it to patients. Patients would say to their doctors. The doctors just roll their eyes and fly off the handle. And that's no criticism of the doctors. That's just because a lot of the information wasn't even there in the literature. However, over the last 2 years, the literature has exploded with information regarding leaky gut syndrome as it relates to autoimmune disease, as it relates to diabetes, as it relates to metabolic syndrome and obesity, which we have an epidemic of in this country. And so now a lot of medical doctors are embracing this more and more once you show them the literature.
Okay.
And with blood-brain barrier issues, as I was going through the articles last night, I saw that a lot of the data is really new. There's older information, but a lot of the good data is in the last 6 months.
Okay.
And I have a feeling that over the next 2 years, this data is going to grow, it's going to grow, and you're going to start seeing it being discussed more and more at seminars. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's going to have the unifying treatment for blood-brain barrier dysfunction, as a lot of educational programs would like. Educational programs where doctors go to get their continuing
it's got to be
education.
specific to each individual
To each
patient.
individual. But I do think you're going to hear more and more and more about it.
Yeah. And leaky gut is going to be related to what we're going to talk about in the leaky blood-brain barrier. So we're talking about leaky brain syndrome. Leaky brain syndrome is almost synonymous, or pretty much synonymous, with blood-brain barrier issues, which we've been talking about for ages. So why don't you define for our listening public what is a blood-brain barrier problem?
Okay. So the blood-brain barrier is where the blood vessels go into the brain, and they separate basically the bloodstream from your brain tissue. I know that sounds simple, but just think of pipes running into your brain. And those pipes have to control what nutrients, things like glucose, metabolites, what crosses into the brain tissue. And there's a lot of energy that is involved with this to make sure that some chemicals don't get in and other chemicals do. And we need that barrier to have good integrity. When that barrier does not have good integrity, as we'll discuss over the next few minutes, a lot of things break down in physiology and in brain function. And just to go back to leaky gut syndrome, what that is, again, your gut is just a pipe. It's a tube. And that tube needs to be able to allow certain molecules to go into your bloodstream so that you have nourishment, so that you have vitamins, so that you have minerals. But it's not good when that barrier function breaks down and then big food molecules start drifting into your bloodstream that shouldn't be there, or whole pieces of bacteria or pieces of bacteria that we've talked about ad nauseum. You can go back and watch our leaky gut broadcast.
So in essence, those two tubes are designed to keep everything out of your system, and particularly your brain, that doesn't belong there. We'll talk about inflammation. We'll talk about autoimmunity. Even an interesting thing relative to your brain is as opposed to the rest of your body, your brain neurons, once they die, they die. So this blood-brain barrier is there to try to keep as few of them from dying as possible by being exposed to these toxins and inflammation and stuff like that.
And guess what causes the blood-brain barrier to break down?
Concussions, of which I have. We're at 8 and counting right now.
I think we got to 9 the other day.
We did get to 9, but people are going to start thinking I'm crazy. It's like, yeah. So, but yeah, concussions cause it. Dr. Gates will get into this, but that's the general theme. You may not realize it, but we have two huge barriers that are trying to keep all that stuff out. When you think about the gut, it's trying to keep the parasites out. It's trying to keep the toxins out. It's trying to keep the bacteria out. It's trying to keep undigested food out. And your brain is even more important, because when these tissues in your body get damaged, they can regenerate a lot of times, certain tissues more than ever. But when those brain tissues get damaged, they're gone. Now, fortunately, the brain can compensate, which is basically what Dr. Gates does here pretty much all day long, is get those brain cells to compensate and stuff. But so blood-brain barrier, leaky gut barrier you can have one and not have the other, but if you got both, man, this is a big problem. And so you wanted to talk about lipopolysaccharides,
right,
relative to both of these barriers, yes. I would just say.
Mm-hmm. So lipopolysaccharide, we'll call it LPS from here on in this talk. So if I get any emails, let's just say, go to the part where I said LPS. And LPS, in essence, is it's a tail of a gram-negative bacteria. So just know there are two major classes of bacteria based on what they look like under a microscope. And one is called gram-negative, one is called gram-positive. And the gram-negative ones have this LPS tail on it. The problem is this LPS is very immune stimulating. It causes you to go into things like fevers. It activates the immune system to go into overdrive, because if it's present in your bloodstream, there's a problem. You have an infection, likely. So the early studies on LPS and the blood-brain barrier found that people who had things like toxic shock syndrome, or they had these infections, their blood-brain barrier seemed to be breaking down. And now it's been substantiated. We attached like 30 references to today's broadcast. And it's been substantiated that those who have strokes, who have a lot of LPS floating around in their bloodstream, they have worse implications from the stroke because there's so much more inflammation that can cross through the blood-brain barrier into the brain and create havoc, so to speak.
And the LPS comes from?
And the LPS comes from, you have a lot of LPS in the gut. And we shouldn't be absorbing LPS at that high of a rate. Unfortunately, because with leaky gut syndrome, lots of times we can have excessive absorption of LPS, or independent of leaky gut syndrome, you can just have the wrong types of bacteria in your gut and absorb too much LPS through natural mechanisms, high fat diets, things of that nature. Then this LPS can flood throughout your bloodstream. Not only can it be associated with diabetes and metabolic syndrome, but it can also be associated with breaking down your blood-brain barrier, which is not necessarily a really good thing.
So we have people come here with a variety of different things, as Dr. Gates said, and we might have somebody come here with dizziness, vertigo, migraines, balance problems, neurological issues. And sometimes when we're doing the exams and the histories, they'll say, but my stomach doesn't hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
Or my gut's not a problem, or I'm prone. Sometimes I'll just go on and say, well, you must be the only person in this country who doesn't have a bad, some symptom from your intestines. Do you have bloating? Oh yeah, but I didn't think that was a gut problem. Do you have gas that maybe is peeling the paint off the walls? You know?
Right. Oh, here
yeah, but that's not a gut problem. It doesn't.
A day. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I thought that was normal.
Yeah.
That was me.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that they have gut problems, and some people genuinely come in and they just don't, or they just don't have symptoms that they think are gut problems. But the biggest part is they're going like, look, I came in here for like my headache. People who have headache problems kind of get the brain thing a little bit more when we start talking about it. Headaches, dizziness, vertigo, they kind of get that. People who have peripheral neuropathy and you start talking to them, that's a neurological issue when the nerves in your feet are dying, and you start talking to them about gut syndrome, they kind of their eyes start glancing over and go, were you listening to me? I didn't come here for my gut, I came here for my feet, and so on and so forth. This is the big deal. This lipopolysaccharides getting through the gut. If it's there, it has to be gone, or you are never getting better. And we do a test on everybody for it. Everybody comes in here pretty much, we do a leaky gut syndrome test on whether they are there. And occasionally, very occasionally, it's normal. Very occasionally, but not for the most part.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's like, I don't know, what would you say? You're looking at all the tests now more than I am.
I'd say about 80%.
Okay, I would have said 90, so 80% there. That's high.
It's a lot.
And it's, you know, there may be other ones that just haven't developed yet, that haven't developed the complete, you know, damage and stuff. So anyway, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. If you have neurological problems in your brain or in your nervous system anywhere, this is a very important thing for you to know and that you need to be tested for. And there are a lot of different things that the brain affects. I mentioned a thyroid before. Dr. Gates actually has this down to discuss, and you might want to make that connection between LPS and the thyroid and the brain and so on and so forth, because it's kind of interesting. This is another one where people kind of glaze over when we talk to them about it.
Yeah, in our thyroid talk, we did it, I think, in early January. We discussed that the thyroid gland actually makes inactive thyroid hormone, and that inactive thyroid hormone circulates throughout the body to go to places like the intestines as well as the liver, where it's converted to active thyroid hormone through deiodinase enzymes. I know you pronounce it differently. I like your pronunciation better, but so that's what they're called. They strip iodine molecules off the thyroid to make it into active thyroid hormone that can go throughout your body. So there is a gut connection to thyroid just from that perspective. There are others as well. This interesting article that was, I think, published in the last 6 months demonstrated that those who have excessive amounts of LPS in their bloodstream, they don't transport thyroid hormone into their brain all that well, which is really interesting. If you go back to our thyroid talk, we talked extensively about how Hashimoto's, which is the immune system attack on the thyroid, it's the most common cause of hypothyroidism in this country, as well as low T3 levels, active thyroid hormones, can be associated with things like depression, people just not feeling so well at a very statistically significant level. And now we have this piece of data associating gut dysfunction, excessive amounts of LPS in the body, not allowing you to get your thyroid hormone into your brain. And just so you know, your brain needs appropriate amounts of thyroid hormone so it can function at the normal metabolic rate. So if you don't have enough thyroid hormone in your brain, probably things are going to slow down. You're not going to think so well. Maybe your thoughts are kind of foggy. Maybe you don't remember things so well. Does that sound like you? Because it sounds like about 80% of the patients that walk into this clinic.
Yeah. And if you've been told that your thyroid, you have all the thyroid symptoms, and you've been told your thyroid is normal, there's about 22 reasons for that. This happens to be one of the bigger ones. Okay, so again, you have to look beyond that lab test that says my thyroid is normal while you have all those, and this is one of the things that has to be considered, and it's back to the gut, back to the blood-brain barrier, and that's a complex issue. And when Dr. Gates in the beginning says, there's not a lot of medical personnel or alternative personnel that are going to look for this, it's because you kind of have to have a view of the entire physiology of what's going on and be able to trace that down. There's really not a drug for it, at least not at this point in time. And technically, there's not an herb for it. It's a complex pathway to correct relative to working with the brain, working with the gut, finding out what works with the gut. There are some references that say there are herbs and botanicals that can help your blood-brain barrier. I took them. They made me very sick. That doesn't mean they make everybody sick, okay? But it means for me, it had to go a different way. I mean, I have to be austere on my diet, and I have to stay calm and zen and all this type of stuff. But Dr. Gates can talk about that if that's something he wants to. Now, this weekend I was reading about Parkinson's, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Shocking. He's the brain guy here. And autism is now being understood that there's an autoimmunity to it. Mm-hmm. They may not understand the mechanisms. I think they were postulating that the immune system damages dopamine in Parkinson's, and that's why it doesn't get in there. I don't know if that's right or not, but he'll probably enlighten us on that. And lipopolysaccharide is being shown that lipopolysaccharide getting through the blood-brain barrier is being shown to be a part of Parkinson's disease. And we've seen that here. Mm-hmm.
We've seen that clinically. Yeah. So this new finding, there's something called alpha-synuclein. Alpha-synuclein is a protein that's abnormal, and it abnormally lodges in the brain of Parkinson's patients and also other movement disorder patients. And when we get these clumps of this protein called alpha-synuclein, specifically in the dopamine producing cells of the brain associated with Parkinson's, because Parkinson's dopamine goes down. So those dopamine centers are not able to function well because there's too much alpha-synuclein basically in that dopamine production area of the brain. And this research article found that when we have high amounts of LPS in the bloodstream, it actually causes alpha-synuclein from the bloodstream to go into the brain at too high of a rate, because it's a relatively recent finding that alpha-synuclein is in the blood. They thought maybe this was just something that was manufactured in the brain. It's not. It's in our bloodstream. It's also in our cerebrospinal fluid. And now we have this awesome finding showing that LPS basically breaks down the blood-brain barrier and shuttles this alpha-synuclein into the brain. So there is absolutely a gut connection. And Dr. Fasano, we mentioned him before, he's one of the world's foremost gastroenterologists on this topic. And he came out with a great study, I think last year, where they demonstrated that Parkinson's disease patients do have leaky gut syndrome. And leaky gut syndrome is very prevalent in Parkinson's disease. And at that point, they didn't really know the association. Maybe they thought this would lead to inflammation that was causing the dopamine producing centers in the brain not to function well. But now we have a specific link causally to LPS shuttling this protein that's associated with Parkinson's into the brain so that dopamine goes down. And we've had Parkinson's patients. Now we also create realistic expectations, because once your dopamine is gone, it's gone. So it's all about trying to prevent further loss of it. But we've had Parkinson's patients who we do gut repair protocols with, aside from neurological rehab and a bunch of other stuff, who do better.
They regain their balance.
Regain balance.
They walk better.
Less stiffness.
Less of that fascination gait, things of that nature. And again, understand in the research, each one of these is one tiny piece. And any of you who have watched us know that how we work is we have an ongoing clinical trial here. We're not doing anything that's hurting anybody. The worst thing that's going to happen to one of our patients is they're not going to meet the expectations that we say. And that happens very seldom, frankly, at this point in time, because we're very careful about this. For a variety of reasons. You don't want to raise expectations unrealistically. You don't want to tell people. I have a lot of people come in here and our credibility goes up and they relax when we say, well, if you have an autoimmune problem, we're not going to cure you. And I'm amazed at how many of them have been told by, unfortunately, alternative practitioners that they can be cured and stuff like that. But they can be, those patients can be a lot better. But the point I wanted to make is each research study, each nugget takes us one step closer and one step closer. So we're not saying that each one of these things is going to cure you or is going to be the thing, because there's a lot of things that screw up your leaky gut that you have to figure out that screwed up your leaky gut. There's a lot of things that screw up your blood-brain barrier. And so those are the things that have to be addressed. And then I just said some people can take certain herbs for the blood-brain barrier and it seems to help. For me, oh my God, I got so sick taking the I shouldn't say taking there's one product from a company that we happen to use a lot of their products, but I took it, oh my God. And I'm really sensitive. I have a low, metabolic capacity, a low neuron firing threshold. Apparently, that's probably one of our other things. But I got very sick. Somebody else might be able to take that and do very well with it. This is an anti-inflammatory product for the brain. And if you see me do that every now and then, it's probably because I have 9 concussions. But I did get a good sleep last night. So the Parkinson's disease and autism, you didn't put autism down.
I didn't put autism down. Autism is a complex series of reactions, like you said.
And it is complex.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the inner ear. And this is an interesting topic because we do a lot of dizziness, vertigo, balance problems. Most people come in are drilled in on the inner ear. I mean, I don't know how many. It seems to me like there's like 18 different problems relative to dizziness, vertigo, balance. People come in and they describe, I'm a little dizzy, or I feel like I'm on a boat, and they go, I got vertigo. And that's not vertigo. And it's generally not their inner ear, but that's what they've been told. So let's clean that up a little bit, because the inner ear can be affected by, I'm aware of autoimmune problems in my world of functional medicine. Why don't we talk about lipopolysaccharides, just to remind people that's what LPS means, and the inner ear.
Okay.
And the things that it can cause.
Great article we attached last night. They were discussing the blood labyrinth barrier rather than the blood-brain barrier. So the labyrinth is the inner ear. Then it consists of where we hear things, the cochlea, as well as the vestibular system, which senses motion. And this labyrinth we have in our inner ear has a specific type of fluid in it, and then it has another type of fluid that surrounds it. And these fluids have specific sodium and potassium levels that have to be tightly regulated for you to have normal inner ear function, to be able to hear and to be able to sense your bowels. Well, in this article, they showed that LPS can break down the barrier between the blood vessels that produce the appropriate amounts of sodium, potassium, and this labyrinth, which is huge. Because as Dr. Rutherford and I have seen, we have had a host of inner ear patients, true inner ear patients, who do really well with our program. And one of the big ones is Meniere's disease.
I thought that might be where this
I mean,
is
at some
going.
point, we're going to have to publish an article, because it's really interesting at this point, not being braggadocious or anything, but just from a scientific and clinical perspective. We've had all these Meniere's patients, and the data has grown over the last 5 years since I've been with you. That Meniere's, it used to be, well, we don't really know what the cause is, and now it's pretty definitive that they think it's an allergic or autoimmune mechanism in the ear, such that the drain of the inner ear, again, I said there's fluid in there, and that fluid has to drain. The drain seems to get clogged in Meniere's disease. And they're thinking that maybe the autoimmune components to the disease, the excessive inflammation, is plugging the clog, or plugging the drain, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's plugging the drain. And possibly all those autoimmune components are in there because there's excessive LPS breaking down the blood labyrinth barrier, allowing the immune inflammation to go into the inner ear and causing this problem. So I really got excited when I saw that article, because it was another step in the explanation as to why a lot of our autoimmune inner ear disease patients, which I'm saying that generally, not specifically, so things like Meniere's and vestibular neuritis and things of that nature, may be improving. not as much neuritis. Neuritis improves for a different reason, but yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So again, these are the things that Dr. Gates has researched. We have applied them clinically, and then you start to determine and see what works, what doesn't work, and not. And man, when you're in an autoimmune situation, you're getting different tissues damaged in each person. Everybody has a different capacity to be able to do certain things. For example, my example on the one supplement that I couldn't take because it made me sick, and yet other people that it would help. So it can be a complex problem to address, and so I think the last thing to do would be to address that. Like you put down, what are the solutions? How do you address a problem like this? One of the things that you first have to understand, those of you who are watching this, it's pretty cool because honestly, this is probably one of the few places you're going to hear this. I look online and everybody's got this is going to be this vitamin, and it's going to be this herb, and you're going to go through, then you're going to go to this program, and you're going to get massage, and you're going to get acupuncture, and you're going to, these are all potentially successful for somebody who maybe has a early problem, or maybe doesn't have a lot of tissue damage or something like that, but that's not the patients that we see. And so we're able to apply a lot of the research that Dr. Gates has been doing, because frankly, most of the stuff we do isn't going to hurt anybody. And when necessary, we will work with a medical doctor in certain areas. So how do you address this leaky brain syndrome? Because it's a pretty complex issue.
It is. And in our society, in the research world, everybody is looking for the magic pill. And I mean, really, that's how researchers make their money. So they're all doing this research to hopefully one day have a diagnostic test or to have a medication that they can sell to a pharmaceutical industry who will make billions on it. Or they're actually funded by the pharmaceutical industry in their steps to get there. So there's a lot of research on different medications that are now being discussed, antibiotics to help this LPS issue, other compounds, things like cannabidiol. We were just talking about this is not a marijuana plant. This is a fake plant to mimic a tropical plant.
Right.
And there's a lot of discussion about cannabidiol, which does not have the mind-altering effects of marijuana, but does have anti-inflammatory effects to help with this LPS.
And then what I hear is a lot of people come in on the consults and they've gone to Chinese medicine or they've gone to Ayurveda or something, and people go like, well, you know, this worked, but it didn't work, that this worked, that it didn't work. I also want to make a point that this is kind of a new patient population. Yeah. So the things that maybe used to work for a more isolated condition, for a flu or a cold or a candida or something like that, it's a different world now. You need to look at the entire physiology, all the biochemistry. You need to look at the brain, and then you can make some sort of a stab at taking a shot at something like this. And if you got dizziness or vertigo or migraine, if you think you're the only one that's not getting better out there, trust me, it's a small group that ever gets that gets better, unless they're addressing it in this fashion. So how do you go about that?
So
Dr. Gates does all of the treatment here right now. So
where we go back to is the gut, because that's where all this LPS is coming from. We have crafted a diet, and then from that diet, we've created about 6 different diets that we use on an individual patient basis for their microbiome. We're trying to get the person's microbiome calmed down to the greatest degree. Your microbiome is the bacteria in your gut, and everybody has a different composition there. And I have found, and I always say that because Dr. Rutherford is doing the intake, and I'm working with people on a weekly basis. Let me just say, we have found that certain diets are really important for certain microbiomes. And with that, there are now studies talking about rifaximin, which is a medical antibiotic to wipe out all the bacteria in the gut to help this issue. I don't think that's necessary, but the right diet, in our experience, is necessary to feed the good bacteria and prevent the bad bacteria from growing. And then we also enact strategies where sometimes we'll wipe out the bad bacteria with naturally, locally acting antibiotics to do that. And then also we will use strategies to heal up the leaky gut syndrome. There are repair agents that we have observed clinically and through repeat lab testing to be effective for that. And that is where we start, because if you get the LPS down from the gut, then likely you're going to be able to help someone with all these conditions that we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying we're curing them, but that in and of itself is the first solution to this problem.
Yeah, and that leads me to a patient that came in the other day, and she has a friend who's here who's doing enormously better. I can say Karen. I think you'll know who I'm talking about.
Okay.
My friend.
Oh yes.
Patient. And she tried to. She watched us, and she got all of our stuff from Karen, and she tried to do these things on her own, and she did the diet, and she did the berberine. We use berberine as a natural antibiotic. We use a lot of things, but that seems to be really helpful for us. But then she just couldn't get there. But it was driving her crazy, because, and I didn't tell you this, because she had another friend who watched us online, heard some of the stuff we did, and got much better. Now I don't know what got much better means. Okay. But the bottom line is he makes it sound simplistic, but there are people who will come in again and their gut will get better in almost immediately. There are people who will come in and 3 months later, Dr. Gates is still working with them, because he had to start them off with pureed peas or something like that, because their guts were so sensitive that they literally couldn't eat anything. And he had to bring them up the gradient so gradually, so that their gut could heal, so that they could ultimately work up to like real food. And you can't even start to get to the brain issues and the neurological issues. And again, he goes back to that conversation. We were just sitting there one day, and I noticed that we had this certain paradigm that we had put together back then, and it just seemed obvious that as soon as we would get here and they get a little better, and we'd go here and they get a little better, and then we'd get to the gut and there would be like this quantum leap. And so we started with that, but that didn't mean we were done.
No,
and then once we got the gut done, now with all the testing, everything else that was left could then be handled with more clarity, because the gut might take care of a lot of things. And those a lot of things might be different in different people. And those a lot of things might be their brain might start getting better like almost immediately.
Right.
Or their brain might not be getting better until 2 months later, or their brain might not be getting better until 3 months later, and so on and so forth. So all I'm saying is we're giving you data. Again, I've noticed in our present day society, we look online, we read something, we go, oh yeah, well, we need proteins to do everything in our body, so let's take more protein and that'll help it. And that's a very simplistic, and I'm not meaning to be condescending, because that's the way we think. We think in terms of, we got a gas tank, it's half empty, we need to fill it up, the car will be good. We have proteins to do everything in our body, from build tissue to make enzymes to make antibodies to all that type of stuff. So more protein is good. And so all we're saying here is all I'm saying is if you hear this and and you have brain issues and you do a leaky gut thing, and your gut feels better, but your brain doesn't, don't think it's because what we're saying is wrong. It's just that it's a complex issue. We're making you aware, though, that if you have these symptoms, this is something that profoundly needs to be considered in your diagnosis.
For sure. That's perfect. That's perfect.
So, are we done?
We're done. That's all we had to say.
Okay, we are done. The master has said we are done. Hey, he's the guy who does all the research on this. I'm to the point where, like, I come in here and just go, oh, this is what we're talking about today? Okay, I know something about that. That'll work. So we're in good shape here. That is really an important presentation. I don't know if we really brought across how important it is, because it's just difficult to do so in a world where you're hit with so many different pieces of data, many of them incorrect, many of them more often just taken out of context. I mean, I could argue that the whole research field is taken out of context.
I would agree.
Every bit is just one piece and one piece and one piece. And I think the value that both of us have is we're pretty good at organizing thoughts, and we're pretty good at organizing protocols, and we're pretty good at organizing, if you will. And so we've been able to come up with an understanding of how this goes. So that's leaky brain syndrome. And I agree with Dr. Gates. You will be hearing this term more and more, just like leaky gut, in the near future. And you can say you heard it here first. So we'll try to come up with another interesting topic for you next week. Hopefully this was interesting. Any feedback you want to give us on these topics, with the exception of our pseudo marijuana plant here, would be welcome. Any any recommendations or interests that you have on topics, you can send them to us. We can't promise that we'll do them. We do get a lot of suggestions, but we do pick from them. So if you'd like to know more specifically about anything, if we're capable, we will be happy to do so. So we'll see you next week. And thank you.
Thanks for watching.
Okay.